Hello. Really good to see everybody here at this, which is the last in the Still Learning Live events. I am Rebecca Wright. I'm president of D&AD this year. And as the first president from the world of education and academia, one of the things that I've wanted to do in this series of talks has been to foreground the role that learning plays in creative careers. And I've had the privilege over the last 3 talks of speaking to creatives about the role that learning has played, but also why learning happens, how it happens, why it's important, and just an opportunity to have conversations that are about sharing insights and, of course, answering some of your questions. So far in this series, we have heard from creative director Lydia Pang. We've had creative strategist Tamrat Amaizeh and copywriter Nick Parker. And tonight I am really delighted to welcome a graphic designer, but so much more than a graphic designer, and somebody whose work I've admired for many years, Pali Palavathanan. And before I introduce Pali, I just want to say that one of the things that has been so special for me about this series is an opportunity to ask quite direct questions about how creatives who have brilliant careers have got to where they are. And Pali, thank you so much for being here and entering into this conversation. We're going to talk for about an hour, and we're going to have a structure which those of you who've joined us before will be familiar with. So in a minute, I'm going to ask Pali to look back on his learning journey that has brought him to where he is now. And we're going to have an opportunity to learn something about that early formative period in Pali's life. And then we're going to talk about what he's doing now and perhaps current projects and current learning. And then the final section is going to be much more about where inspiration comes from and where the stimulus for learning is in kind of Pali's world and career. And at the end of each section, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So please feed them through, and by magic, they'll appear with me, and I will be really happy to ask Pali on your behalf. So, Pali, a really, really warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I should say, we've known each other for a little while, and we've spoken about your work on a number of occasions. But one of the things that feels special about tonight is asking not just about the work, but a bit more about you. So can we begin by asking you to look back on how you've got to where you are? And particularly, I'd like to start with kind of understanding a bit more about what happened in terms of your learning really early on in your career. How did you come to be a graphic designer?
Yeah, well, my creative journey started a long time ago, back in the early '90s when I found myself growing up as a refugee in another country, and really the most important moment was receiving charity, being on the end of receiving charity. And so I learned very early on about the immigration process, experiencing some sort of end product of war, housing issues, welfare, poverty in a Western context. So everything that happened back then informed what I do now, and I really had to look back and try and understand what was happening at that time. And and because of all those experiences, I've tried to it's given me a real sort of passion inside to try and express some of the stuff that I've experienced, and it's coincided weirdly with what's happening, post Trump, and all the sort of issues that have come to head, and this sort of awakenness that's starting to happen across society. But and when I was and specifically when I was growing up as a refugee and moving around from school to school, being really shunted along, the one continuous stream for me as a creative, and I didn't know that I was a creative, I was just expressing it, was I was drawing to survive. So I'd go into a new classroom and I had to survive somehow. And my way of signaling that there was someone here, someone new, someone conscious, and I had something inside me was to draw, and that way I allowed people into my world. Um, and then I suppose if we fast forward 15 years, I ended up in education, arts education, against all the cultural pressure that goes with being an Asian Asian creative, trying to get into the space, and yeah, really, and that's where we met actually, at Kingston. And so I went to Kingston University, and my tutor Mike, who we both mutually know, he describes it very well as the penny drop moment with me, where up to that point I was really just trying to make things look nice, trying to get image and type together, and I didn't really know what I was doing or trying to express. But really, when I landed at that course, it was, I understood that I was trying to problem solve something, and that was my first taste of what was to come, and trying to apply that continuously subsequently onwards from that.
So you've said a number of really interesting things there. And one of the first things was that I wanted to ask was, what age were you when you and your family came as refugees to the UK? How young were you?
No, well, actually, it was in Canada, so
Oh, it was Canada then.
completely,
Aha,
yeah. So 10, and that was at 10 years old, so really formative.
really formative.
But
And
you don't
then,
really understand what's happening.
well, I guess one of the other really interesting things for me was that you talked about drawing as a way of not just expressing yourself, but communicating. And I think there is a difference, actually. And I think that's perhaps what you're touching upon too, about that penny drop moment when you're at Kingston University and you're studying graphic design. And you mentioned Mike Bond, who was the tutor. I wonder what role have individuals played then? Is there it sounds like those relationships and how you develop your communication has been quite important for you in kind of discovering the type of creative that you were and wanted to be. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Um, yeah, there's been definitely, the tutors at university were the first to try, and they could see me trying to express things, but it wasn't really making sense. And just really trying, really showing me that there's a problem out there, and I can use my ability to communicate something in a visual way that's effective and makes that even better. That was the real sort of turning point for me. And if I think
Mhm.
back to like now, the real inspiration for me is working with refugees who are experiencing that same thing as we speak, and going through all that, because just showing, looking at the resilience they have, and you feel the financial pressure, you feel the housing pressure, you feel the, I was doing a workshop with a few survivors of torture, and I just I did a FaceTime with my daughter, and then the woman next to me was like, I haven't seen my daughter, she was ripped away from my arms. And that's inspiration for me right now, rather than anything specific in a design sense, someone specific in a design sense. But that really motivates me to check myself as a creative, and am I doing it for myself, or am I doing it for the right reasons? And that helps contextualize the work that we do currently.
So can you tell us a little bit about how at Kingston or from Kingston, what your next steps were into where you are now? Because I didn't say when I introduced you, Pali, that you are the founder of TEMPLO. So you're now running your own agency and studio, but obviously that wasn't a direct line, a straight line from graduating from Kingston. So can you tell us something about that? Because that I think is what a lot of our listeners will be super interested in.
Yeah, so I was quite fortunate. I wrote down on a piece of paper 3 companies I wanted to reach out to and work with, and we created these A0 posters, and I really wanted to use those posters to get the attention of the people that I wanted to work for, and so I ended up sliding these posters underneath everyone's doors, physically going there. I actually fly posted one of these A0 posters on GTF's main entrance, which didn't come off very easily. And I think Andy still, to this day, rues me doing that.
We should
But I
just
was quite
say that,
lucky. Yeah,
sorry, we
go
should
on.
just say that GTF is Graphic Thought Facility, a UK-based design studio who many of our listeners and viewers would know, but not everybody will.
Yeah, and they were, they were my real inspiration at the time, and I can see why I was really inspired by them, because they were just really independent, fiercely independent, and willing to just be them. And I really liked that, and I really kept that in my head the whole time. And yeah, so anyway, I got to IDEO, which was incredible, and not the right place for a design, like a graphic designer, to really learn the trade. But I loved the sort of thinking and strategy, and the sort of general sort of innovation that they talk about, and so I really loved that. And then I ended up becoming a designer at Johnson Banks for the longest, and so again, had huge experience with lots of a very varied amount of clients, and then I had a brief stint at Wolf Hollins, and but really once I left Johnson Banks and tried to get into other companies, I thought I had a really good portfolio and strong work, and I felt ready to lead, be a sort of leader of a group of designers, and so I sort of felt inward, inside. I was ready to sort of express lots of things, express things that I think were relevant to design, um, and and then I felt like I had hit a ceiling, in the sense that the design industry couldn't see me as one of the leaders. I was applying everywhere, all the major agencies, and they couldn't see me as someone that could lead. And I was getting all sorts of offers that I didn't think were acceptable, really. And so I had this real, but simultaneously that I really felt really passionately about, there was a lack of authenticity when it came to talking about certain subjects within the design industry. I got really fed up with, you know, designers having a cause in mind, but then ending up being a poster or a logo and then saying bye. And I felt really deep down inside there was more to it than that, and I didn't know what that was. Um, and I was just, my observation of the industry at the time was, I really felt like designers were being paid to care, and it's still, to this day, I still stand by that. That you get a brief in, it's amazing, it's for an amazing cause or organization. You research that to the depth. You become a mini expert, if you like, and then if you're lucky, you get a bit of primary research or secondary research, and then you execute it. Normally, amazing work, and then you deliver it, package up, deliver everything, and then you say bye to it, and then you move on. And I didn't like that moving on element, because what I've learned now is, real change. If we really want to talk about change, and everyone's bloody talking about it, but if we really want to get into the crux of it, real change takes an incredible long time to achieve, and it's really about longevity and staying with a cause, and really devoting time, energy, and everything, really, to make that happen. And that doesn't really comply with the model of the industry as it stands, because we're a capitalist industry, and I understand that we need to keep keep things moving, pay bills and all that kind of stuff, put food on the table for your design team. So it's a real challenge, and so that forced me really. To be honest with you, I had no choice but to set TEMPLO up because um, no one was gonna. There was no one out there that was gonna allow me the space, time necessary to really talk about the things I wanted to talk about, which led me to, setting up TEMPLO.
And Pali, that's really interesting hearing about how kind of it sounds like each step on your kind of your career gave you a different kind of a set of confidence, but also a sense of what you didn't want to do. And that's another thing that I think is really valid about learning. It's not just about learning from the things that are positive or the things that reinforce what you think, but it is those moments also where you say, hang on, this isn't delivering what I want. And that thing about moving on quickly, I think a lot of us would identify with that. In a studio, you're not actually in control, if you're working for other people, of when that moment comes. And that you've given a really clear rationale, I think, for how TEMPLO kind of came into being. I think that there's something else really interesting about the sense of kind of calling that comes through when you're talking. And I wonder if, I don't want to put words into your mouth here, but it feels like there was a sense of inevitability to getting to a point in the way that you talk about, now I'm on my own and I can be in control of the briefs. And did you have a really clear idea, therefore, of the type of work you wanted to do once you'd founded your own studio?
No. um, um, you know what? I knew, I was doing this like when I left John Spanks. I knew there was, whilst I was trying to, just survive financially, and I was trying to get into other agencies and see if anyone wanted me. I knew deep down inside that TEMPLO had to happen, I had a feeling. I had a feeling that I needed to do something about the human rights violations in Sri Lanka. My family are from Sri Lanka, so I wanted to talk about the genocide. I got frustrated with the design industry, and it's not their fault. But when the tsunamis happened in Japan, for example, because everyone's inspired by Japanese designers, everyone wanted to do something, and I just was looking around, going, "Who the hell's going to do anything about the human rights violations in Sri Lanka?" And so again, I don't hold it against them because no one knew about it, to be honest with you, and so that's why I sort of left my job, and with a sort of single-minded ambition was to get to Sri Lanka as an adult and understand the fabric of a war-torn country, and especially the north and east regions where my family are from, where a lot of the oppression, genocide, and that whole area is controlled by the military, which is controlled by the government, and so this was, this is I always say this is like, but I remember Bob Gill saying, he's got that famous line, if you want to design something for a laundrette, go to the laundrette. Well, this is like going to the laundrette on steroids. This is, I wouldn't advise it necessarily, but I and that's where I did a night bus from Trincomalee, which is on the east side, all the way through to the north, which is Jaffna, and went through various military checkpoints, people going through fencing and barbed wire, and you see the oppression, you live with the oppression. There's a picture actually of my cousin here. So this is a picture I took in Kashuna Beach in Jaffna. And so this is in bottom left is my cousin gripping my Steve Jobs biography book with absolute fear, because there's two army tanks that roll up, and 24 army members. The people there are petrified of the army because people go missing, people are white banned regularly. So you get to feel it. You're there. It's palpable. It's you can feel the tension, and that fed into on that night bus. I sketched out what became the beginnings of the Stop Torture campaign, which was really the start of an 8-9 year project that I've been working on with on the Sri Lankan human rights atrocities. So it started up with the Stop Torture campaign, and really it was a sketch. And what I didn't want to do is, if you go to the next image, the next so that the top left is the Stop Torture project, and subsequently a body of 8 years of work. So I'm talking about this idea of longevity. Really was the cornerstone, the pivotal moment that's changed everything for me, because really I did this sketch on a night bus, and then what it ended up becoming is I didn't want it to be where I'm just designing it and going to It's Nice, that creative review, and saying, look what I did. Look at this lovely graphics. I wanted it to really be embedded. And so once I came back from Sri Lanka, I ended up just showing, and I think this is a really good lesson for everyone watching, really. If you're, don't be afraid to show an idea. Everyone's normally quite secretive, and they're very protective, but to be quite honest and open with something, and really by osmosis, through showing and sharing with lots of people, I ended up getting put in touch with a South African human rights organization called ITJP, that were forming at the same time as we were forming, and it ended up becoming, again, like an 8-year relationship where we've design and human rights law, if you like, intertwine. And it's been a really interesting learning curve for me, because I wasn't politically aware as well. This is something that is worth mentioning. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't politically aware, but I got pushed into this. I got forced to. I had no option but to do this, because of, again, my history, being a refugee, and coming from that culture, the Tamil community, and being from an oppressed community.
I'm just going to remind our viewers that they can send in questions for you. I've got so many questions kind of in my head as you're talking, Pali, and I think we're kind of moving into talking about what you're doing now too. But it really strikes me that the idea of time and learning happening as this sustained activity is running through the work that you've been doing, probably before the Stop Torture campaign, but certainly since then. And I wonder that it seems, as you're talking, that there's a point at which perhaps the project does take over or takes on its own life, so that you begin not knowing where the journey is going to take you. How does that translate when you're running a studio into deciding which projects that you're going to do, and when to take on new projects, and how you might actively seek out projects as well? Can you tell us something about how you navigate that?
Oh, that's a really good question, because that's really where I'm at, really trying to balance running a sustainable company, but also balancing, really, we don't have any sort of hands up who wants to do this kind of attitude, or we don't have like a scoring app or anything, what's ethical, what's not ethical. I think it's like pretty obvious, and a gut feeling, what works in our philosophy, what doesn't work, and we're quite absolute about really what aligns with our values and what doesn't. For example, we got approached by a property developer, which we never worked with anyway. But we were simultaneously, in parallel to that, we were working on with Global Witness on anti-corruption, so um, and so we did a bit of due diligence and started looking into their accounts, and very quickly found out that they were being their accounts ran into the Virgin Island, so offshore accounts. And so we cannot be working on trying to expose anonymous shell companies and then working with a client that doesn't pay any tax, via all these offshore companies. And so that's really where we're at, and trying to. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I mean, it definitely answers part of it. I think there's something about how, when you're running a studio, and on the one hand you need to be able to do jobs that pay and that are going to provide kind of work and allow you to keep the company running, and then this sense of mission that I think you're talking about, and projects that are perhaps evolving, and they develop into new work as you go. And I guess it's partly around that, how I think you talking in a way about the due diligence that you're doing and how you choose which projects to do and not is a part of that. But it's also, in a way, how do you organize your schedule if you've got these really long sustaining projects, and then you've got projects that might be coming in around that or on top of that? How do you prioritize? How do you make decisions?
Well, when I started out in the industry, I was always told this rule: 80% of stuff that you don't really want to work on, corporate stuff, and then that would pay for 20% of the stuff that you want to work on. And we're like completely the other end of this, where I was thinking, well, actually, I want to work on 80% of the stuff that I want to work on, and then 20% of stuff that I really, really I need to work on. I need to get something out my system, if you like. And so,
Mhm.
um, and we've made it profitable still. I make no bones about it. When we are for profit, um, but we have to make sure that scale. I think scale is important when you're talking about change as well, because the larger you get, the less impact you can make from really sort of on the ground impact, I would say. And this is something that I've been tussling with. Like I don't want to grow too big, and I want to stay with. So let's just take, for example, the Sri Lanka human rights atrocities. That's really the backbone, and everything I've learned from that subsequently. That's really the backbone spirit of TEMPLO and everything that we do. And I don't want to lose that. I just don't want to lose that at all costs. And if that means, and that means staying small and tiny and nimble, and so be it. And that really helped me, especially at the beginning of the journey, really, 8 years ago, because I could, for example, when it came to United Nations, I could plug myself into the UN and work from there, operate out from within, and understand. And that was an amazing experience anyway. My journey through
Yeah,
the
you've just
United
dropped it
Nations.
in there. You've just dropped it in there in a kind of, working at the United Nations. But that's a really significant thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
To be a
it
graphic
was,
designer serving that
yeah.
institution.
Yeah, it was a profound experience, actually, because I was I've always been an alien. When I was growing up, I was an alien in another country, and then when I went into the industry, I was an alien of being the only Asian person, or any color, full stop, for most of my time in most of the rooms in the industry. And then as a designer, as I was starting my own thing up, I was this alien in the UN space, the whole human rights space, because I was the only creative. I'd have people coming up to me going, "Who are you? What do you do? Your socks are funny colors." That's the kind of, I stuck out like a sore thumb. But it was a fascinating process, because we're small, because we're nimble, and that's part of my process. It allows me to be able to understand. That allowed me the space to understand the internal mechanisms of the political chain, if you like, how it works, and that helps me think, okay, so this is how it generally works, and then I can plug. How do I plug my bit in through this journey, through this
Mhm.
mechanism to make it efficient, make it effective?
Yeah, and it sounds like you're the type of learner who wants to be close to the learning and to the source to have that kind of intimacy. We've got some questions coming in, Pali, and I hope I'm going to get some of these names right. Afai, I think it is. I hope I've said your name right, Afai, who asks or comments that so much of what you're talking about feels like the work is kind of shaping who you are and what the practice can mean. And I think this is really a question about how you pull people into your agency. And I think that also means, I mean, I guess designers and non-designers, how there are quite a lot of people commenting on how they'd love to come and work for you. So there's obviously people who would identify with the cause and the sense of mission and what you're doing. But I guess it's also interesting to know how you pull people in when they're clients too. You know, how do you go about, do you go out seeking?
Yeah. So okay, that's two questions, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I know I'm asking lots at once.
No. Let's address the students, the talent coming in. Like I
Yeah.
obviously I would love to work with everyone, but I can't. And they have to be talented, yes, but also they have to be, I would say, willing to understand all sides of the coin as well. Be willing to, because my my general experience with education right now is, they're very hungry to change things, very hungry, and I feel like the current industry is not compatible with that, because the new generation, they see through it, I would say, and um, they see through it and they want something a bit more real, and that's difficult. That's difficult to, and that's really, I think that's a journey. And I think whenever whenever I speak to graduates and interns that, they're with us and they go, Pally, where next? Where do I go next? I really wanted to do this, but and I say, well, you have to struggle and suffer a little,
Mhm.
and work out. I can't. I don't think you should just land in the perfect, job straight away as well. I think you need to understand what works, what doesn't work, where people are going wrong, all that kind of stuff, really, to understand what's going to be relevant for you. Because that real bit from graduating to when you get to your streak where you're getting to 28, 29, 30, I think that's really an exploration. Yes, you need to pay bills and all that kind of stuff, but it's still an exploration of what you really want to be, so you can then turn that into something. um,
Yeah,
And then to answer the second part of that question, so the client side, I know you've answered that. I haven't given you that answer yet, have I?
not yet. That's okay.
No, what I'm at the beginning, I really had to sound people out, try and seek the projects. What's happening now is the projects are starting to seek us, and because the clients that we work with, they want something a bit more than they want a longer partnership, if you like, a longer collab, and it's not it doesn't work with us if you just see us as a supplier. um, and
Mhm.
it works with us when you start to see us as someone to collaborate with, and to be at the table, if that makes sense, to make decisions going forward. So for example, and it's probably worth getting the image up of, I was quite hesitant to get into the climate change space, for example. I was quite honest I was trying to be as honest as with myself as a creative as possible, in the fact that I wasn't going to be, I don't have the skill set to invent new material. I don't have the skill set to change manufacturing processes. So really, my personal skill set is to communicate things that are really difficult to understand, I was quite hesitant to jump into the climate change space full stop, because I didn't want to be filling up Instagram squares and saying stop stop coal or stop oil and all this kind of stuff, and then because my thinking is, okay, so what next? I'm always thinking, what next? How do I go forward? I wanted something a bit more in depth. And so I spent about 2 months researching the space, um, and of climate change, obviously, and I wanted to really find out, just from a UK perspective, where my skill set could be put to good use. And I identified the Climate Change Committee right away, pretty much right away, to be honest with you. And I saw them because they're basically the sort of pressure group that puts pressure directly to the government to keep. They set the targets, and then they hold the UK government, to account if those targets aren't met. And I like that. And at the time, when they before we got involved with them, at the time, they they weren't communicating really well. I couldn't understand what they did. And what I really wanted to do, because I could see that they produced amazing body of data, climate data, and I wanted to help them really pull that to the front, and try and explain really complex issues. So if we're talking about coastal erosion, it's quite a dull subject. But if you use the tetrapods physically in a sort of way to communicate that, then you're starting to breach that subject, rather than just going, banging someone over the head, going, change your ways, don't do this, don't do that. It never works. And so I needed to search for them. So in this case, I approached them similarly to the Stop Torture stuff. I approached the Climate Change Committee. I saw that they had a young CEO, Chris Stark, and we reached out to them. I gave them some sort of insights into my thinking, and then 2 years later, they came back at me, and they were like, "Right, it's time to do this." And then again, it's a long journey. And so we started something right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're about to start a big piece of work again. And it's that interesting where you're working with the CEO as well. I think that's really important, to be again at the table, working with the it's really important as a designer to be at the table, stakeholder table, and trying to really influence and craft where we go next. I think that's really important. If you have a client that's willing to, we've got the creative, we want that, where do we go next type of thing, then I think that's where we're really helpful, and it's an interesting collaboration process.
I mean, there's something really unique about what you're saying, though, because mostly when we talk about the designer being at the table, we're talking in a kind of commercial context about being with the client or the MD, or, in the boardroom. And actually, you're talking about politics kind of predominantly here, because a lot of the change that needs to happen sits in a realm which links very directly to politics, and in this case UK politics, talking about the role of the Climate Change Committee. And that isn't a space that a lot of designers would feel confident in. And actually, I had a question that came in from Ravindu saying that they find themselves wanting to create work for social causes, but lacking expertise to represent an issue without bias or without inaccuracy, which I think, speaks a little bit to this thing of how you need to acquire, and the fact that you did years of research and getting to know a space. But Ravindu goes on to say, what can I do to develop a sense of political awareness to confidently represent an issue? And how does that question, and the second part of the question, two questions again, is how do you develop the confidence to sit with politicians and sit in these spaces and really contribute and challenge?
I would say it's getting easier every year. At the beginning, it was, again, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was I was trying to convince people that the design approach I was taking could be useful for to join. I think it's like when just showing them how you can join lots of things together very quickly and cut through any political tape. That's when I can sell it to them and they understand the power of design. Um, what was the question again? The second one?
So it was, I guess it's how you develop confidence, and Ravindi was asking about how do you develop a sense of political awareness and I guess kind of, the confidence and the expertise. How does that, what's your process there?
Um, I'm very conscious as well of, if we're talking about politics, there's two ways you can do it really. When it's the Sri Lanka stuff, obviously it's very close to the bone for me, and so um, it naturally comes. I think the authority to talk about it naturally comes with it, and so being, for example, at the beginning of the year, I was in a group with, we're trying to get MPs to launch a new campaign, and so we're in a strategy meeting, and I have to. I'm very conscious about. I don't want to be the designer in the corner that goes, "Look, guys, like this is my vision," and so it really becomes a listening exercise and trying to slowly trying to join the dots up and trying to obviously there's a internal thing where I've got this battle with the creative ego, if you like, because obviously I want to do something visually interesting, but then I have to listen, and the listening part is because I what I've learned actually over the years is the clients have all the answers, um, and I think with that, if you're talking about confidence, that builds and builds where you have the experience to actually listen and go along with the process a bit more. And if a client says something that feels uncomfortable, to at least listen to it and understand it. And I just think in general, once you build up a body of work and you start to demonstrate how your work impacts an organization, I think it becomes easier and easier and easier to get that confidence and get clients listening to you. Especially, we talked about power, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they want to, before they make any key decisions, the design element needs to be discussed and fed into that process.
I think also you've said something really important about the role of listening, that you can't know everything when you start. I think what you're saying in everything that you've done, the role of learning and listening and researching is really, really important. And I think, as you say, that having the body of work to demonstrate the impact and the role that you can play is part of it. But can we kind of move into what's kind of the final section, I guess, to talk a little bit about the research process, because the final section of this is about kind of where you look outside of your discipline for inspiration. And I think you've already talked about that a lot, but your process is interesting because the way in which research is kind of it's your lifeblood, isn't it? Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah. So I I often get clients at the beginning when we're starting to talk about it, and they sort of look to me right at the beginning, like the first meeting, and they go, "Right, what do you think, Pali?" And what I end up doing is really, again, I at the beginning of a project, I really sit back, and Anushka, who I run the company with, she's really the main person, especially at the beginning, to sort of deal with the client and handle that process. But really, I'm not really in the foreground much at the beginning, and I'm just listening to things. And and then what I do is I don't want to. I try my hardest not to really focus on anything or try and latch onto anything, and really, I I go on long walks. I normally have like a start point and an end point, but I really then in between that I have no idea how I'm going to get to the studio. And vice versa to home. And then what I like to do is unconsciously really be taking in everything and really thinking about. I really think design and creative thinking, especially, happens in motion. I don't really have ideas at a desk. I don't think that's actually physically possible, and I think it's quite an interesting thing to really go in this process where you're absorbing things around you and um, again, unconsciously thinking about this problem that you have to try and crack, whether that's visually or just a strategic sort of thing. And normally, it like sort of sediment sort of drops in place. And so there's a few examples here. Yeah, so for example, this is a weird one. So, even in a cemetery, you can find creative inspiration. This is something on the right hand side for Plymouth College of Art, but the inspiration for that was walking through a cemetery and having this like 400-year-old tombstone that was being held together by this band, which I thought was just so profound, and wondered whether you could use this band to contain the ideas and philosophies of an arts institute, and really try and contain the subject matter. And so that became like the visual inspiration for the campaign that we did for them. And then the next one is our work for CEDEP. So they're a not-for-profit business school based in Fontainebleau Forest. So I don't know if anyone's been to Fontainebleau Forest, but they're famous for these sort of boulders that stack up on one another. And so just after a big board meeting with the main stakeholders that set up, I brought my hiking boots and started walking through. It looks like a beach, but actually that's the floor of the forest, which is got white sand. It's really stunning, really unusual. So, and that became, I started to form these three-dimensional shapes that stacked on one another. And then the final one is our logo for the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition. So the first ever coalition in the UK on anti-corruption. And walking through, I picked a route. I wanted to walk through the financial district and really try and absorb the feeling of because there's definite corruption going on through that space, and to then see, this is a literal picture, and then having seen that finger in the negative space became the inspiration for the final logo. So whether it's a concept for a campaign or just imagery in general, or even just specifically a logo, the walks help me sort of process and sort of get to it faster, I would say. More than anything, just the feeling or overall feeling that I want to get across, depending on what the project is.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about process, having heard you talk about kind of work and values, because you seem, or what comes across, is somebody who's really alive to the world around you. I think sometimes a profession like graphic design can seem as if it's at one remove, or dealing with the surface, or kind of, I guess, wrapping ideas. And yet even your process is about being alert and alive and moving. And I think that's fascinating. I feel like I'm learning a lot about you, but also about, in a way, how these things, as one of our viewers put in their questions, how this kind of shapes you but also keeps propelling you forward. If you were to talk or share some advice or learnings with viewers now that you would feel would be sustaining or important, or things that you wish you'd learnt or known earlier, what might they be?
Really, if this is specific about TEMPLO and the work that we do, and people generally interested in getting into this space of change, I really think it's all about balance and trying to seek the ultimate truth within that. Not having an agenda, not trying to push any sort of political ideology. I think so. For example, our Gaza work, for example, that's a real hot potato, and what I really wanted to do was keep that super neutral and try and just tell the information in the most truthful way as possible. And I really think if you are going to be creating change, it's trying to, by doing that, you're not taking any sides, you're not pushing anyone away. I think if you really talk about change, because right now I think we're at this point in society where everything's polarized. You're left, you're right, you're this, you're that, you're CNN, you're Joe Rogan. um, it's There's nothing in between. We've lost that. We've lost the connection in between, and everyone talks about unity on the left, but we're censoring people, we're shutting things down, we're stopping people from speaking, and in a way that we're acting like them, and really, if we are going to, this new generation coming out, if we really want to start talking about change, the effects we can do as designers to affect change, like we need to stop this ideology and stop trying to come across like you're taking a side, stop pushing against, and try and sort of work backwards a little bit and go, okay, how am I going to actually work with these people? That's why I like Climate Change Committee, for example, that they're not coming at it from a banging the door down angle. They're trying to work with the various sectors, the sectors that we don't want to talk about, to actually go, right, so every year we're going to try and cut you down. If we try and communicate various sort of things, maybe there's better ways of doing what you're doing, or maybe like you can still make money. You can still make money. That's like, we don't want to stop you doing that, but there could be different ways of doing it, and being mindful, conscious of your impact on the planet, etc. So that's really where I'm at with it, and what I try and tell as many people coming into the industry, trying to do what we want to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, that sparked some further questions that have come in, Pali. Rafai asks, what was the advice you wish you'd heard when you were younger that would have prepared you for where you are now?
It's a good question. If someone told me that everything you're doing right now is like pretty much like a research field trip, and you're going to use this one day to do something using that knowledge, that would have been quite useful. Rather than going, oh shit, this is bad. um, that would have been quite helpful.
I think that's lovely. I think most of us actually would like to hear from our future selves some reassurance. So to all of you out there, there is kind of reassurance there that actually things lead you, I think, often in unexpected directions. But if you follow something which really feels true to what you want to do, or your belief or your passion, then there is likely to be good things that come from that. There's a question from Khadija here, which is kind of a bit more pragmatic, but it's interesting you talking about research and that piece of advice that you'd have given your younger self, because Khadija would like to know, how long do you typically spend on designs? We've talked about time quite a lot and longevity tonight, but how long do you typically spend on designs? And do you take an iterative process? So is there a kind of an initial stage, a development stage, and then a final stage?
Yeah, obviously clients want everything tomorrow. But I, I think the sweet spot really, that's hard to answer in like a definitive, but I always try and make sure that the most time is spent at the very, very, very beginning, the ideation stage, some people call it. I think that's really important to try and whenever someone wants something like next week, the work's atrocious, I would say, and sometimes we get lucky, but really, I need to sit with it again because I run my own thing. Because we're relatively quite small, I can control that aspect quite well. What was the second question?
Well, it was kind of how long do you typically spend on designs, but then also is it an iterative process? So you've
Yeah,
talked
yeah,
about kind of ideation, do you follow then the development and the final? Is there a
yeah.
structure to how you work?
Yeah, so there's really a beginning bit where it's that beginning bit where you're brainstorming, you're trying to, it's stage one if you like, where you're coming up with multiple sort of options for whatever the brief is, and then you present the best work to the client. Normally, there's tricks of the trade in that where you've got your favorite, but then there's all sorts of strategies how to place your favorite, and it's normally where you presented the nicest or the most work for that section, and you go, oh, like there's we just ran with it, it just felt really natural and all that kind of stuff. And then once hopefully they've chosen your favorite route, then it's you're developing the project, you're developing the chosen route further, refining it, some would say, and then normally then after that you're presenting it again to the internal stakeholders, getting sign off, and then it becomes you're going into artwork phase. So definitely you need that iterative stage. The stuff that we're doing with the UN at the moment with the climate scientists are quite interesting because we launched that project last year, and we're starting the next project, next phase of work with them, and it's much more like a live thing where we've got access to one another's mirror boards, and it's even more iterative, if you like. Quite interesting when it's right in front of the client, right? When that's quite exposing, but actually quite interesting and quite necessary when you're working with climate scientists. So we're quite nimble again in that sense of trying to adapt our way of working to different unexpected ways.
Pali, we're just about out of time, and there are so many more questions that I could ask. But I think, the other thing that strikes me listening to you and looking at your work, and of course, our viewers can look at your work on the TEMPLO website. That there's so much which has real resonance right now in our world, that the things that have always mattered to you and the way in which you pursue, I think, truth, communication, genuine communication, the kind of the values of both neutrality but also of advocating for the oppressed and for victims. It feels like over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years, so much of that is now at the forefront of what surrounds us every day. Certainly, I'm talking from a very UK perspective here, but certainly in the West, that the concerns are there. And I think what's really empowering and inspiring is hearing you talk about a really kind of active and human and humane way of practicing as a designer to do something, but to do something with real commitment. And it just seems like you're the perfect guest to end this Still Learning Live series with, because really learning runs through the heart of everything you do, but also what you seek to achieve in your work, that we're learning through the work that you put in the world. So a huge thank you, and a thank you for being here, being kind of so generous and open about all the things that you've spoken about. And I just want to end by saying a thank you to all the guests who've been part of this series. So Lydia Pang, Tamarata Maise, Nick Parker, and of course the wonderful Pali Palavathanan. Thank you to all of you who've listened and been part of these events, and there've been many people who've not been able to join live but have viewed again online. And just a reminder that all of these events are still available on the D&AD website. I want to say a big thank you to the D&AD team, particularly Laura Havlin, for supporting these events and helping establish such great guests, and to Hannah Hawke and the production team for everything you've done. And I think I just want to finish by saying, keep on learning, and to thank Pali once again. Good night, everybody. Wherever you are, stay safe, keep learning. Thank you.